But the odor was wrong, far too dense, too focused to be coming from an animal. Trusting their instincts, the men followed the current of air deeper into the forest. Nearly 200 meters from their work zone, the terrain tightened into thick brush and young growth. With every step, the stench intensified. Then Garcia caught sight of something unnatural flashing between the branches. Metal. As they pushed closer, the forest revealed something it was never meant to hold. A cage stood among the trees, crude, handmade, welded from steel rods. It was roughly chest-high, narrow, and long, fused directly to the trunk of a mature spruce. The bars wrapped around the tree itself, locked into place with heavy welds. Vines and wild grape had crept over the structure, as if the wilderness had tried, unsuccessfully, to erase it from sight. A padlock sealed the door. Inside was a body. Dennis, hardened by combat and no stranger to death, froze at the sight. The woman lay curled inward, knees drawn tightly to her chest, as though trying to make herself smaller. Pieces of clothing still clung to her, what remained of a t-shirt and denim shorts. Time and dry autumn air had preserved her in a terrible stillness. Decomposition had advanced, yet the body had begun to mummify. Her skin had darkened and pulled taut against her bones. Long, dark blonde hair lay tangled around her face. Her arms were extended forward, fingers clenched as if grasping for something that never came. Peterson radioed the dispatcher immediately. Within minutes, the call was passed to the county sheriff. 40 minutes later, law enforcement arrived. Deputy Sheriff James Caldwell and Park Ranger David Hunter stepped into the clearing. Both had worked countless crime scenes. Neither had encountered anything like this. Caldwell requested immediate backup and forensic support. The forest was sealed off, a perimeter drawn. As daylight faded, investigators filled the scene. Lights cut through the trees. Cameras captured every angle. Evidence was logged with care. Medical examiner Patricia Holmes examined the remains without removing them. The circumstances defied routine procedure. The body was trapped inside a cage welded to a living tree. Recovery meant choosing between cutting steel or cutting the forest itself. They chose the metal. As tools were prepared, the forensic team searched the ground nearby. What they found told a quiet, horrifying story. 3 meters from the cage lay a darkened metal bowl, military-issued. Close by was a 5-gallon plastic container, empty but marked with traces of water. Beneath fallen leaves were fragments of cable, energy bar wrappers, and an empty plastic bottle. These were not remnants of a single visit. Someone had returned here again and again. Then investigators noticed the bars. The inside of the cage was scarred, deep gouges, frantic and uneven. Every rod bore marks, especially near the door and along the back where the tree pressed close. The pattern was unmistakable. Fingernails. Human fingernails. Some scratches were old, others newer, layered over one another. Evidence of long confinement. Of repeated attempts. Of hope breaking slowly against steel. At around 9 that evening, under portable lights, the cage was cut open with a grinder. The body was removed with precision and respect, placed into a transport bag. Holmes conducted an initial assessment. The victim was a woman in her 20s, approximately 165 centimeters tall. Based on tissue condition, death had occurred 3 to 4 weeks earlier. No obvious trauma was visible. The true cause would require autopsy. Her identity came the following day. Dental records confirmed what investigators feared. The woman in the cage was Allison Marks, reported missing on July 20, 3 months earlier. If she had died weeks before discovery, then she had survived for more than 2 months inside that cage. Alive. Isolated. Miles from anyone who could hear her. The news reached her parents immediately. Susan Marks collapsed upon hearing it. Robert Marks demanded to face those responsible for the investigation. Jurisdiction transferred to the FBI, as the crime had unfolded on federal land. Special Agent Mark Sutton, a veteran investigator with 2 decades of experience in abduction and homicide cases, assumed command. He assembled a team of agents, forensic specialists, and profilers, tasked not only with finding a killer, but with understanding how such darkness could exist, hidden in plain sight. In October of 2003, 3 contract loggers working inside a restricted zone of Yellowstone National Park came across something that would later be remembered as one of the darkest crimes ever uncovered on protected land. Less than a quarter kilometer from a service road, they found evidence so disturbing that even seasoned investigators were forced to confront the depths of human cruelty. For weeks, a young woman had been kept alive inside a crude metal cage welded directly to a tree, cut off from the world entirely. Her captor returned again and again, bringing food and water, not to save her, but to prolong her suffering and watch life slowly leave her body. This was the fate of Allison Marks, a 24-year-old college student from Colorado who vanished during a solo hiking trip, leaving no immediate trace behind. This is a story of how untouched wilderness was transformed into a silent place of captivity. It is also the account of a painstaking investigation that stretched over 3 relentless months, and ultimately led to the arrest of a man whose past held an unsettling echo of the same violence more than a decade earlier. Allison arrived in Yellowstone on July 19, 2003. She was nearing the end of her studies at the University of Colorado in Boulder, focused on ecology and wildlife. Summers, for her, were devoted to long hikes. It was more than a hobby, it was a way of life she had followed since her teenage years. Those who knew her described her as careful, methodical, and experienced. She planned thoroughly, carried proper equipment, and never failed to tell her parents exactly where she was going. For this trip, she chose the Lamar Valley, beautiful, remote, and quiet. She checked in at the park entrance, secured a camping permit, and reviewed her route with a ranger. Her plan was simple and responsible: stay on established trails, camp near a stream, and spend several days observing wildlife for a research project. That evening, she sent her parents a final message, letting them know she had arrived, set up camp, and was safe. They expected to hear from her again the next day. July 20th came and went with no word. By evening, concern turned into alarm, and her parents contacted park officials. The rangers did not dismiss the silence. In a place like Yellowstone, missing a scheduled check-in by more than a day was already a warning sign. At first light on July 21st, a search team moved into the area where Allison intended to camp. 6 rangers located the site near Slough Creek, several miles from the nearest established trail. The tent was still upright, but something was wrong. The entrance wasn't opened or cut, it had been violently ripped apart. The zipper was gone. Inside, everything was chaotic. Her sleeping bag lay twisted, belongings scattered. Her backpack was later found dozens of meters away in thick brush, partially emptied, with clothes, a map, and a compass strewn nearby. Yet the ground told a strange story. There were no clear signs of a struggle. No trampled vegetation. No blood. It appeared as though Allison had either left abruptly or had been taken without resistance. Search dogs were brought in immediately. They followed her scent for a short distance before it vanished across rocky terrain. By nightfall, the operation had expanded to 30 people. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging scanned the land. Crews searched within miles of the campsite, checking streams, ravines, cliffs, and animal corridors. They looked for evidence of falls, injuries, or predator attacks. Nothing surfaced. It was as if she had dissolved into the landscape itself. The search continued for days, then a week. Dozens of people joined: rangers, volunteers, locals, even tourists. Allison's parents arrived and pleaded for the effort to continue. Her father, Robert, a retired military man, organized volunteer sweeps through the forest from dawn until dark. Her mother, Susan, distributed flyers everywhere: park entrances, small towns, roadside stops, anywhere someone might look. By the end of July, officials made the decision to suspend the active search. The terrain was vast, unforgiving, and full of places where answers could remain hidden forever. The prevailing belief was grim: an accident in an unreachable area, or an animal attack that left no recoverable remains. Allison's parents refused to accept it. They hired a private investigator and offered a reward, holding on to hope as summer faded into autumn. Then, on the morning of October 23, 2003, deep inside a closed section of the park, 3 logging workers, Michael Dennis, Carl Peterson, and Jose Garcia, were carrying out contracted sanitary logging. The area had been damaged by a small fire months earlier and was far from public access. They had worked there for weeks in near silence, miles from the nearest road. Late in the morning, Dennis noticed a smell drifting through the trees. It was heavy, unmistakable, the sharp sweetness of decay. He called the others over, and the machines fell silent. At first, they assumed it was an animal, a deer or moose lost to predators or the elements. They had no idea they were standing at the edge of a truth that would finally answer what had happened to Allison Marks. Robert Marks insisted on facing the people now responsible for the case. Because the crime had taken place on protected federal land, jurisdiction shifted to the FBI. Leadership of the investigation fell to Special Agent Mark Sutton, a seasoned professional with 2 decades spent pursuing killers and abductors. He quickly formed a task force of 10 agents, forensic analysts, and behavioral profilers, each assigned to uncover not only who was responsible, but what drove such calculated cruelty. Their first answers came from the autopsy, conducted on October 24 at the Park County Morgue in Livingston, Montana. Dr. Robert Schmidt, a pathologist with 30 years of experience, led the examination. What he documented painted a slow and merciless death. Allison Marks had not been killed quickly. She died from dehydration and extreme exhaustion. Food remnants were still present in her stomach, fragments of energy bars identical to the wrappers found near the cage. Her tissues showed severe dehydration. At the time of death, her weight had dropped to roughly 40 kilograms, despite standing 165 centimeters tall. Before her disappearance, she weighed close to 58 kilograms. The difference spoke of prolonged deprivation. Additional findings deepened the horror. Her wrists and ankles bore abrasions and bruises, some healed, others recent, suggesting repeated restraint or desperate attempts to break free. Her fingernails were splintered and worn to raw flesh, confirming sustained scratching against the metal bars. Her skin was marked with countless insect bites, many infected. There were also first-degree burns caused by sun exposure. The cage had been placed in an open clearing, left to bake under direct sunlight for hours each day. As medical findings came in, FBI profiler Jennifer Lowe began assembling a psychological portrait of the perpetrator. A specialist in serial offenses, she studied the scene, the construction of the cage, and the offender's behavior. Her conclusions were precise. The suspect was likely male, between 40 and 70 years old. Strong. Familiar with the terrain. He did not seek an immediate kill. Instead, he confined the victim for an extended period, revealing a deep need for domination and observation. He provided food and water sparingly, not to preserve life, but to prolong suffering. Watching her weaken was part of the purpose. The cage itself required preparation, welding skills, tools, transport, and careful placement in a remote area. This was not impulsive. It was deliberate. The structure stood just a few meters from a service road and not far from where Allison had vanished. Investigators concluded she had been moved, likely forced into a vehicle after reaching the rocky area where her trail abruptly ended. Agents reviewed park checkpoint records from July 19 through July 21. Hundreds of vehicles passed through Yellowstone during that window. They narrowed the list to pickup trucks and SUVs, around 50 in total. At the same time, laboratory analysis continued. The metal bowl and plastic canister were tested for trace evidence. Partial fingerprints were recovered from the bowl. DNA was extracted from its rim and from the canister handle. The samples were entered into CODIS, the FBI's national database. 3 days later, the system returned a result. There was a match. The DNA belonged to Thomas Harley, age 61, a former hunter and wilderness guide living in Gardiner, Montana, just miles from Yellowstone. His name was not new to law enforcement. 14 years earlier, in 1989, Harley had been linked to another disturbing case. A woman named Carolyn Simmons, 32, vanished near Gardiner. 2 weeks later, she resurfaced alive. She told police she had been abducted after her car broke down along the highway. According to her account, Harley offered help, then rendered her unconscious and imprisoned her in the basement of a rented house. She said he restrained her, fed her once daily, and sexually assaulted her repeatedly. Simmons escaped only because Harley left town for several days. She broke free and climbed out through a basement window. Harley was arrested and charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and rape. But the case unraveled. Investigators found no clear physical evidence in the basement. Simmons struggled to identify the exact location. Medical examinations failed to confirm assault. Her past drug use was brought up in court, weakening her credibility. The jury returned a verdict of not guilty. Thomas Harley walked free. He moved houses. He resumed his life. And for years, nothing followed, until the forest, at last, revealed what had been hidden among its trees. With Harley's DNA now linked directly to the place where Allison Marks endured the final months of her life, the path forward became clear. Agent Sutton moved swiftly and secured an arrest warrant. Before dawn on October 28, a SWAT unit was dispatched to Gardiner. Harley lived alone on the edge of town, in a modest single-story house with a porch, pressed up against the trees as if the forest itself were a shield. His old Ford F-150, a 1988 model, sat in the driveway. Officers surrounded the property and ordered him out over a loudspeaker. There was no response. Moments later, the door was forced open. The house was silent. Harley was gone. What he left behind spoke louder than his absence. In the garage, agents discovered a welding machine and leftover metal rods, identical in type and thickness to those used to build the cage. Inside the bedroom, a large map of Yellowstone was mounted on the wall. Several locations were marked with crosses. One of them matched the exact spot where Allison had been found. In a closet, investigators recovered women's clothing, a t-shirt and jeans. Later testing confirmed they belonged to Allison. Her DNA was present on the fabric. The basement revealed the darkest evidence. Harley had converted it into a workshop. On a bench lay tools and a notebook. Inside were dates and brief entries, written with cold precision. Specialists would later determine it was a record, a log of visits. He noted when he came to the cage, what he brought, and the condition of the woman inside. The first entry was dated July 21. The last, September 25, ended with a single line, "Not moving anymore. Probably all over." A nationwide alert was issued. Harley's photograph flooded news broadcasts. Authorities reinforced the Canadian border and monitored bus terminals, airports, and roadside motels. Investigators knew he was dangerous and capable. A skilled survivalist, he understood the wilderness and could vanish into it for weeks. But even those who know the shadows eventually step into the light. On November 3, a gas station security camera in Big Timber, Montana, captured Harley's truck. He was seen fueling up and paying cash. The alert went out immediately. Less than 20 minutes later, a patrol unit spotted the vehicle on Interstate 90. Harley was pulled over without incident. He exited the truck calmly, raised his hands, and allowed officers to restrain him. Thomas Harley was charged with aggravated kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment resulting in death, and first-degree murder. The trial opened in March 2004 at the U.S. District Court in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The prosecution was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Craig, known for handling complex, high-profile cases. Harley's defense fell to Margaret Wilson, a veteran attorney with a reputation for taking on difficult clients. Harley never confessed. At preliminary hearings, he remained silent. The defense argued that the case rested on circumstantial evidence. DNA on a bull could be explained, they claimed. The notebook might have been fabricated. No witnesses had seen Harley abduct Allison or hold her captive. But the evidence formed a chain that could not be broken. Forensic analysis showed that the metal rods found in Harley's garage matched the cage bars in composition and structure. The welds on the cage mirrored the distinctive technique used on equipment in his workshop. Experts testified that welders leave signatures as unique as fingerprints. Handwriting analysts confirmed the notebook entries were his. The clothing recovered from his home carried both Allison's DNA and Harley's, establishing direct contact. Investigators reconstructed the sequence of events. On July 20, Harley was likely driving through the Lamar Valley on remote forest roads, routes known only to those familiar with off-road access. He had guided and hunted in the region for more than 4 decades. He knew every bend, every clearing. He would have noticed Allison's camp. A lone hiker. Isolated. He may have watched and waited. Sometime after nightfall, he approached the tent. He could have posed as a ranger. Or someone asking for help. When Allison opened the flap, the moment was taken. Whether by force, threat, or a sudden blow, she was subdued and dragged to his truck. The destination had already been prepared. The cage had been welded and secured weeks earlier, hidden among trees and vines. Nothing about this was spontaneous. It was planned. Methodical. Harley did not act on impulse, he selected, prepared, and waited. Allison was not targeted for who she was, but because she was there, at the wrong place, at the precise moment he had been waiting for. He locked her inside with minimal food and water. According to his own notes, he returned daily at first. Not to save her, but to watch. He returned with small portions of food and water. He observed her. He recorded it. The diary entries were short, stripped of emotion, yet chilling in their clarity. July 21st, brought her here. Everything prepared. She screams, but there is no one to hear. July 23rd, refuses food. Drinks only. Begs to be let go. July 27th, started eating. Weak now. August 3rd, scratching the bars. Hands bleeding. Wonder how long this will take. August 10th, mostly silent. Lies down all day. August 20th, only water today. Food is finished. We'll see. September 5th, very thin. Barely moves. September 15th, gave water. Minimal. September 25th, final note. During the trial, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Alan Graham testified about Harley's mental makeup. In his professional assessment, the defendant was a classic sadist driven by an overwhelming need for dominance. He did not seek instant violence. Death itself was not the goal. Control was. Duration was. He required time to observe, to witness helplessness unfold. Harley could have killed Allison immediately. Instead, he chose restraint. He chose isolation. He chose starvation and thirst, delivered slowly, deliberately, far from human eyes. According to Graham, the suffering was not incidental, it was the point. The defense attempted to argue insanity. That effort failed. Comprehensive psychiatric evaluations showed that Harley fully understood his actions. He planned them carefully. He concealed evidence. He anticipated consequences. This was not madness, it was intent. The court rejected any claim of diminished responsibility. Margaret Wilson tried to plant uncertainty in the jury's mind, but the case left no room for doubt. The facts aligned too cleanly. The pattern was too precise. Allison's parents were present every day. Robert Mark sat rigid in his seat, gripping his wife's hand, his gaze fixed on Harley with quiet, frozen fury. Susan Marks wept softly, especially when the diary entries were read aloud, when photographs of the cage filled the courtroom. During one recess, Robert stepped toward the barrier separating the gallery from the defendant. His voice was low, controlled, meant for only one person. "You're going to rot in prison," he said. "And I'll know it every day until I die." Harley did not react. He did not turn his head. He did not answer. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Judge William Harrison delivered the sentence, 2 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole. There would be no release. No return. Harley was 62 years old when the sentence was handed down. He offered no apology. No explanation. No final words. Even behind bars, he remained closed, distant, unreachable. Psychologists sought to study him, to understand the mind behind the crime. He refused every interview. He lived out his days in silence. After his acquittal in the Simmons case years earlier, Harley had slipped quietly into the background, unnoticed. Whether he had been waiting. Whether he had planned again. Whether there were others who were never found, those questions remain unanswered. The FBI reviewed decades of unsolved disappearances across the region, searching for patterns, for echoes. They found none. And so the story ends where it began, not with clarity, but with silence. He returned with small portions of food and water. He observed her. He recorded it. The diary entries were short, stripped of emotion, yet chilling in their clarity. July 21st, brought her here. Everything prepared. She screams, but there is no one to hear. July 23rd, refuses food. Drinks only. Begs to be let go. July 27th, started eating. Weak now. August 3rd, scratching the bars. Hands bleeding. Wonder how long this will take. August 10th, mostly silent. Lies down all day. August 20th, only water today. Food is finished. We'll see. September 5th, very thin. Barely moves. September 15th, gave water. Minimal. September 25th, final note. During the trial, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Alan Graham testified about Harley's mental makeup. In his professional assessment, the defendant was a classic sadist driven by an overwhelming need for dominance. He did not seek instant violence. Death itself was not the goal. Control was. Duration was. He required time to observe, to witness helplessness unfold. Harley could have killed Allison immediately. Instead, he chose restraint. He chose isolation. He chose starvation and thirst, delivered slowly, deliberately, far from human eyes. According to Graham, the suffering was not incidental, it was the point. The defense attempted to argue insanity. That effort failed. Comprehensive psychiatric evaluations showed that Harley fully understood his actions. He planned them carefully. He concealed evidence. He anticipated consequences. This was not madness, it was intent. The court rejected any claim of diminished responsibility. Margaret Wilson tried to plant uncertainty in the jury's mind, but the case left no room for doubt. The facts aligned too cleanly. The pattern was too precise. Allison's parents were present every day. Robert Marks sat rigid in his seat, gripping his wife's hand, his gaze fixed on Harley with quiet, frozen fury. Susan Marks wept softly, especially when the diary entries were read aloud, when photographs of the cage filled the courtroom. During one recess, Robert stepped toward the barrier separating the gallery from the defendant. His voice was low, controlled, meant for only one person. "You're going to rot in prison," he said. "And I'll know it every day until I die." Harley did not react. He did not turn his head. He did not answer. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Judge William Harrison delivered the sentence, 2 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole. There would be no release. No return. Harley was 62 years old when the sentence was handed down. He offered no apology. No explanation. No final words. Even behind bars, he remained closed, distant, unreachable. Psychologists sought to study him, to understand the mind behind the crime. He refused every interview. He lived out his days in silence. After his acquittal in the Simmons case years earlier, Harley had slipped quietly into the background, unnoticed. Whether he had been waiting, whether he had planned again, whether there were others who were never found, those questions remain unanswered. The FBI reviewed decades of unsolved disappearances across the region, searching for patterns, for echoes. They found none. And so the story ends where it began, not with clarity, but with silence.